And also breaking at this hour, Baltimore remains on edge. The National Guard patrolling the streets as crowds have begun gathering again. And a citywide curfew will be in effect in just 5 hours. The governor of Maryland is vowing not to have another repeat of last night, where riots left businesses looted and burned. At least 20 officers injured, one in critical condition. Those images are reminiscent of the riots nearly 50 years ago that broke out in the city after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Those riots left 6 people dead, over 1,000 businesses that is looted, and millions of dollars worth of damage. The city experienced a population exodus, white flight out to the suburbs. If tensions remain this volatile, could the same thing happen all over again? With more on this, Guy Benson, senior political editor for townhall.com, Steve Moore, distinguished visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, and Michael Balboni, a former Homeland Security official. Great panel. Great to have you all here. Steve, I will start with you. You know, a lot of people talking about financial disparities. The president this afternoon talking about how people who live in these communities have experienced horrific financial problems. And I have to say, are the financial problems a result of the violence, or is the violence a result of the economic disparities?
Maybe a little bit of both, but these are areas of the country where there is just so much poverty and so much crime and so much welfare dependence. And it's really a tragedy in 21st century America that we have these pockets where you just have lawlessness, terrible schools. And, you know, as a Republican, I think the Republicans should start going to some of these areas and maybe saying, you know, look, Democrats have ruled cities like Baltimore for 50 to 100 years. What have they really done? And the same thing in Detroit. I mean, we don't want our major cities to end up like Detroit, but when you have liberalism run amok, that's how this ends, and it's not a happy ending.
And we're expecting the mayor to comment sometime in this hour. She's got a press conference scheduled. We'll be hearing directly from her. She's taken lots of heat because of the way she's handled this thing. Michael, to you, we've got some 20 officers in trouble here, hurt, injured in some way. What's your reaction tonight? And, you know, night's going to fall here. I know that we have a curfew in place, but does that mean people are going to be safe?
Well, what's shocking kind of is some of the official rhetoric that's been out there. You know, there's the right of free speech, but that is trumped by public safety. And what we haven't really seen, even from the president's comments, is that you got to draw the line. Folks, wait a minute. The public has to be safe first. And then we'll talk about what the complaints are, what the riot issues are, and that's really not been the focus so far. That's a discordant message. It's about getting the rule of law reestablished, and that's what everybody should be doing right now.
Let me tell you how far we are from the rule of law tonight. Even tonight, a day after what happened, the massive problems last night. Guy, to you, I understand that the Baltimore Orioles are going to have their game, but it's not going to be open to the public. This to me is amazing and shocking.
There's going to be no fans?
There's going to be no fans watching the game. So think about it. This is a city that relies on tourism for about $5 billion every year. You know, their economy is really the Preakness, the Inner Harbor, you name it. This is a community that relies on the goodwill of Americans coming in because they feel safe. What is the impact on that city tonight of what's been going on over the last 48 hours?
Oh, it's terrible and it's heartbreaking. And it's disturbing watching these images. And look, I want to say a lot of this unrest originally traces back to the death of that young man in police custody. And I think it's absolutely worth pointing out that his family and that community absolutely deserve answers about what happened there. And I think that's legitimate. And just frankly, 4 white people sitting on television talking about Baltimore, I just want to acknowledge we might have some blind spots. That being said, the way that the city has consumed itself, this violence, the looting, the ransacking, the lawlessness, it is completely unacceptable. And people from across the spectrum have to make that absolutely clear without making excuses for that behavior.
You know, Gerri, the thing that's interesting about modern cities is American cities are making a huge comeback. I mean, you go to Nashville, New York City is making a comeback, Chicago is making a comeback. You know, the downtown areas are bustling with activity, and Baltimore is a good example. You go to Harvard Place.
I got to tell you, I mean, I understand what you're saying.
But what I'm saying is that there's a kind of low-income area that isn't feeling the connection between the economic vitality.
We were looking at this very thing thing today, and I call the folks at Moody's because they actually analyze these cities and their finances. They have some 50 cities all over the country that they look at in particular because they have high poverty.
Right.
But believe it or not, Baltimore does not have low debt ratings. Why? Because they've got a handful of institutions, not Fortune 500 companies, but institutions like Johns Hopkins that pour a lot into the community. But in my view, Michael, they are one step away from having real financial issues. And I don't think the people of this community realize that they're hurting the very institution that could save them.
Well, so again, the disconnect. So this is a city that's been plagued by bad police relations over the last couple months. In fact, last year, the Baltimore Sun did this huge expose on police brutality. So knowing that you've got that problem, the key is to be proactive, reaching out to the community, but also saying to the community, reach back, so that there's this dialogue back and forth. The time to have that conversation is not in the middle of a riot. And unfortunately, what you see is that folks are reacting. They weren't proactive in this. They need to be, because this is, as you said, this is one of the key elements to folks staying in place, bringing their businesses there. Safety first. It's the first thing that people think of when they wake up in the morning.
You've got to feel like you're going to be okay. So here's Baltimore today. You bring up the fact that they're doing so much better. Their population is something like 622,000. It's down 36% from 1980. Right. 36%.
But most of that
per capita income, 22,000. Right. A lot of this was lost in the wake of the riots before. Did we learn our lesson? Guy, to you, the president today seemed to be saying, and I was sort of shocked by his comments, because he seemed to, I didn't hear the optimism in his voice. He did not seem upbeat when he was addressing this. I expect him to be the quarterback, the guy saying, we can fix this, we can make it better, I'm going to lead this. This will be the next 2 years, the final 2 years of my administration will be stopping this very kind of thing. Why didn't we hear that?
Well, it's hard to be upbeat, I think, when you're looking at the pictures, the live pictures on television. I will say that the new Attorney General, Loretta Lynch, the statement that she put out, I thought was strong and sensible. But what I heard from the president today, one of the things that he said that really bothered me was he tried to turn this into a partisan football issue, saying, well, if only the Republicans in Congress would pass my agenda, we can get to work on some of these issues. Excuse me, his agenda has been rooted in Baltimore politics, has ruled the day in that city for decades. And the idea that more government, more spending is what that city needs to, for its salvation is insulting on its face. And to bring up partisan politics in that context is just wrong.
You're exactly right. And I read an article. Who's the owner of the Orioles? Peter.
I can't help you
Angelo,
there.
I think it was. And he had this article saying, oh, it's because of free trade that we've lost all these jobs in Baltimore, which is ridiculous. The issue is very simple. What's wrong with these communities? There's no fathers. The schools are terrible. There's crime. These are basic problems that could be solved if somebody would step up. And on
that score, you agree with the president, who said that, that people are impoverished, that parents can't do right by their kids. You guys agree on the symptoms. I agree with that.
It's just that what we do about it is completely...
It's totally different.
But we're also kind of lacking leadership, because, like even in Ferguson, Missouri, so the Justice Department goes in and says, no, the actions of the officer involved, they were not criminal. Okay, but there's been a historic sense of the brutality, and yet there's no monitor that comes in from the Civil Rights Department. There's no further involvement of the Justice Department in that system. So it's like we're pointing out the problem, but then we're going to walk away. And this has really set up all of these things, because it's like a tinderbox. One spark and you're going to have these types of reactions. So why aren't we being proactive as a nation and looking at these problems and showing that kind of leadership?
We need enterprise zones in these areas. We need school choice. We need crime control. Kind of basics that make.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit here, because what I'm going to say is this. You don't wait for economic opportunity to come to you. You go to economic opportunity if you know what you're doing. And I've seen people do this. I've seen immigrants to this country do this. True. My family did. If it's not coming to you, you got to get up off your keister and go somewhere else.
That's what people in Detroit did. They left.
Okay, I want you to hear some sound from last night, because a councilman had something to say that I thought was particularly interesting on this point. Here's a councilman from our coverage last night during the wake of the riots.
violence is wrong. That's never acceptable. Understanding that there's a symptom of something that's going on here. And what I'm trying to articulate to you is when you look at communities like this in urban America, lack of education, lack of commercial development, lack of opportunities. It's the social economics of it. It has nothing to do with West Baltimore or this particular corner in Baltimore. This could erupt anywhere in socially economically deprived America.
Guy, what do you say? Is it socially deprived economic America, as the councilman says? You know, do we have to go to root causes here? What are the root causes?
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely part of it. And, you know, he talked about the ability for community development or for communities to develop themselves. And it goes back to what you were talking about, Gerri, self-reliance, getting a job, employment. Those things are made much, much harder when there are riots and looting. I mean, that's the thing that is just so hard to watch when you're looking at your TV screen. These are communities that are already struggling. And to have businesses chased away by this sort of lawlessness, I mean, it does not make the opportunity to get a job and to reach your potential any easier for people who are already struggling and underserved and are born in a tougher situation than a lot lot of other people.
Yeah, Guy,
and that's it's like they're tearing apart their own.
Guy, the residents of these areas are the people who are actually the victims of this violence.
Yes. Well,
right?
All right.
So
yes.
Here's the point I want to. One cautionary note. So what we should try to avoid doing is ascribing the violence to all the people in Baltimore.
Right, exactly.
That's not
that was my point.
What we're looking at is intelligence that's coming through law enforcement that says that, of course, there are instigators, there are radicals who have taken this as an opportunity to go in there and cause everything to come up.
Well, and it was a lot of high school students, I think, in that first instance. Guys, I'm going to have to go. Thanks for coming on tonight. Appreciate your time. Here's our question tonight. Should the Baltimore mayor be doing more to protect small business? Log on to GerriWillis.com and vote. I'll share the results at the end of tonight's show.